My name is Melissa Heron, and today I will be introducing what's new in 404 for the 2D mapping team. The three features we've introduced in 404 are the simple implementation of 2D volumetrics, a new algorithm parameter called smooth output with exact gridding, and we've introduced improvements to the histogram performance and usability. I'll step through some highlights of these features and show a brief demo of each. For the simple implementation of 2D volumetrics, we focused on ensuring that the calculated results and reporting fit with industry standards. We've also tried to ensure that the workflow was straightforward and could be completed quickly. To achieve this, we've introduced an auto-compute option for the reference plane. We've expanded the constraints to support geoshapers and the entire grid AOI. We've also introduced the ability to define the apex and spill, and there's now an option for you to export your results and include the constraint centroid. In the 2D volumetrics dialog, after defining your top boundary, the next step in your workflow would be to define the reference plane for the lower boundary of your calculation. The default setting for this and recommended best practice is for the user to define the boundaries for the calculations, but this is no longer a requirement. Users can now select the auto-compute option for reference plane, which will use the minimum grid node value within the bounds of the selected constraint. This auto-computed value can be adjusted later on in the volumetric parameters table. We've also introduced two additional constraint options, GeoShaper and the entire grid AOI. Once you've defined your boundaries and the constraint, you click Apply and the volumetric parameters table will be populated. The calculated volume for each constraint will be bounded by the defined apex and spill values. These can now be adjusted and manually defined by the user. So if your apex falls below the maximum constrained grid value, then your volume will only be calculated up to your apex. If your spill falls below the minimum constrained grid value, then the volume will continue to be calculated all the way down to the defined spill value. You can see an example of them in the two diagrams at the top. You can also define slice thickness and the number of divisions for your reported slices. Slice thickness starts at the defined base plane and divides the results into the user-defined thickness until your apex is reached. This means that your top slice might be a smaller thickness than your other slices if the difference between the apex and spill is not evenly divisible by the defined thickness. The number of divisions can also be defined, and this is how many times the volume between the apex and spill is cut. So if you take a look at the bottom left diagram, you can see that there are 3 divisions or 3 cuts, and this results in 4 slices being returned. By defining the number of divisions, you ensure that the thickness of each slice is equal. Once you're happy with your parameters, then you can click Calculate, and this will run the calculation and automatically open your Results tab. The Results tab is split into 2 tables. The top table lists each constraint, for example, each polygon within your polygon set, and for each of these polygons will list the XY coordinates for your polygon centroid, along with the area and the volume. If you select one of the polygons in the top table, then the individual slices for that selected polygon will be reported in the bottom table. The reporting units for both tables can be modified using the drop-down menu at the top of the Results tab. And each of these tables has an export option that allows you to save the calculated results to a CSV file or a tab delimited file, or there are a number of other formats that are supported as well. So that is a basic overview of the simple implementation of 2D volumetrics. I'll now just go through a quick demo. So to open 2D volumetrics, you can right-click on a surface grid and select 2D volumetrics. You can type 2D volumetrics in the quick access and select it from here. Or in map view, you can right-click on a surface grid and select 2D volumetrics. If you launch the 2D volumetrics dialog from a grid, then that grid will automatically be populated as your top boundary. If you want to select a different grid, you can select this icon, and all of the grids that you have loaded in your session will be displayed here. Once you have a grid selected, the minimum and maximum values and the domain will be returned down here. For reference plane, you can define a constant value or select the new autocompute option. Constraint now supports polygons, geoshapers, and the entire grid AOI. For polygons or geoshapers, you select that option and then click this icon, and it'll load all of the geoshapers that you have loaded in your session. Select a geoshaper and click OK, and it'll be populated here. Once you've defined your boundaries and constraint, click Apply, and the volumetric parameters table will be populated with each of the results. So within this geoshaper set, I have 5 geoshapers. And in this table, I can modify the apex and spill. So if we want to 300, let's go 3000, and define the spill. And you can see that as you're typing in the values, yellow is a warning, red means that it's not allowed. So if we were to type -4 and hover over the cell, it gives you a little tooltip that says the spill cannot be greater than the apex. And if you were to try to accept this value by hitting enter, it'll just revert back to the previously accepted value. Slice thickness can be defined here. So if you wanted to do 100, if you wanted the slice thickness for all of your geoshapers to be 100, then you could click this icon, and then all of the geoshapers within your set would adopt that same value. That icon only works for slice thickness and number of divisions. Or you can define the number of divisions, so you could say 3 divisions, which will result in 4 slices. Once you're happy with your parameters, you can click Calculate, and this will run through the calculation and automatically open the Results tab. Within the Results tab, you have each of the geoshapers within your set, and for each of these, they have the XY coordinate of your centroid, has your area and total volume. And if we select this top geoshaper, then we can see that we have our 4 slices as we expect. So that is a quick introduction to the 2D volumetrics. The second feature we've introduced is a new parameter called smooth output with exact gridding. This parameter is available for framework algorithms within the grid and contour workspace. The 3 algorithms that support this parameter are least squares, derivative gridding, and refinement gridding. The parameter is set to 0 by default, which means that no smoothing will be applied, but it can be increased up to a value of 1 for maximum smoothing. By applying smoothing, the user has more control over the output grid and can create more geologically accurate maps. This parameter is especially useful when you have an area that might have a lot of irregularities that can cause artifacts. You can see in this schematic cross-section that when no smoothing is applied, the output grid follows the data points very closely. But as smoothing is increased, the output no longer is constrained to the source data, and it doesn't follow the trend as closely as it did before. To use the smooth output with exact gridding parameter, you'll open the Grid and Contour workspace and then select the Algorithm tab and select one of the three algorithms that support this new parameter. So in the left-hand panel, under Frameworks, select either least squares, derivative gridding, or the refinement gridding algorithm, and you'll see the smooth output with exact gridding parameter available. In this example, we're using the Frameworks refinement gridding algorithm and using the default value of 0. And you can see that the output grid has some artifacts and some harsh lines that cut through the grid. So if you were to increase that parameter to 0.99 and rerun, your output grid is much smoother and it no longer has those artifacts. But the data may not be as closely followed as it was before. So I can show you a quick demo of that. I have a grid already created. You can see it here. We'll just open up the Grid and Contour workspace. Whoops. So I have this horizon. I can show you our input horizon. This is what our input horizon looks like, and this is what our Grid and Contour looks like with the Frameworks refinement gridding algorithm, and the smooth output with exact gridding is set to 0. But if we increase this to something like 0.95 and then rerun, it'll generate a new output, and this one we can see still has some artifacts, so then maybe we want to increase it to something higher. And this is kind of an extreme example, but as you rerun, you might have to adjust the parameters. You can see that this looks like a more reasonable output than the original. So we can kind of compare this to the original grid, and you can see that the output has been greatly improved. And there might still need to be some cleanup that happens with the data, the source data, before you get a very good map, but that's kind of the idea behind it, is clearing out some of these artifacts. So that's the smooth output with exact gridding. The third feature we've introduced is improvements to the histogram in the Grid and Contour workspace. So a new layout has been introduced, additional graph display types have been made available, and we've increased the performance on the Histogram tab. The new layout on the Data tab has an expanded view of the histogram and table tab on the right side of the panel, and the selected source data summary now shows additional details based on your selected graph display type. So here you can see that we have the graph display type map flag selected, and in the selected source data summary we now see a breakdown of what sort of map flags we have for that data type. We've also introduced additional graph display types. So we have X, Y, Z, and confidence for surface pick values, and map flag for zone manager attributes. We've also increased the performance when working with the histogram. So we've reduced the amount of time it takes to switch between data and reduced the amount of time it takes to change the priority order when working with large horizons or large point sets. We've also decreased the amount of memory that is used when working with these large data sets. So I can show you a quick demo of this here. So here I'll select a horizon that has 23 million points, and it was populated almost instantaneously. I can switch between another horizon that has 17 million points. I can change the order and select all, deselect all, and there's almost no delay between the amount of time that it takes to populate the histogram. So that's a quick overview of that. If we go back to the grid and contour workspace, then I can kind of show you the new workspace. We have your source data here, and your histogram now populates the entire right-hand panel. Your graph display type is available up here, and you can select, since we have surface picks, I've selected the graph display type confidence, and for all of the picks that have been interpreted, the confidence rating that's been assigned to them is now displayed here. So this allows you to quickly identify if there's any poor or fair picks that might be questionable that you might want to exclude, or if there's some that are unrated, maybe you want to go back and reevaluate them. It just allows you to look at the data in a different way. You can also select X and Y and kind of quickly find outliers using those options. And that's kind of a quick introduction to the histogram. So that's a quick overview of what's new in Decision Space 404 for the 2D mapping team. If you have any questions about the functionality shown here or any of the grid and contour functionality, feel free to reach out to myself, Melissa Heron, or to Nick Matthews. And that's all I have. Thanks.